Now, I did grow up in a stereotypical Italian
Okay.
Italian Catholic background, where there'd
Okay.
be a picture of Sinatra, the Pope, and the Last Supper in that order.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Set Listing Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson. Joining me today, we're getting off the Bruce bandwagon, but he will come up as he normally does. A couple months ago, Brian had me on his podcast and we had a great time. And so I asked Brian if he would return the favor, and he did. So, Brian, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So, tell my audience a little about yourself.
Well, the whole elevator pitch, I suppose.
Yes.
Well, I do work full time, boring insurance adjuster job, and I do enjoy music. Music is something that definitely brings joy in my life. All sorts of music,
Yeah.
arts, culture, and whatnot. I am passionate about a lot of mental health issues, as I as you may have gathered from our visit on my podcast. So just I enjoy just learning more, discovering more,
Yeah.
just seeing
W-
what makes me tick, that kind of
And
thing.
what's the name of your podcast again?
Mental health film comment.
Okay.
Not a very creative name, but it just kind of fit the purpose of it.
Yeah. And so, what a lot of times is you will talk mental health issues and combined with pop culture. For
Exactly.
example, we talked Blind by the Light. We touched a little bit on Love and Mercy when we were on. And so, yeah, and it was a lot of fun. So, wh- before I get to your early background, what drove you to do that kind of podcast? What was the your origin story? Why did you decide to start talking about this?
I'm not sure. Well, to be honest with you, there have been some times when I've been watching various different movies, and I'm watching the movie, and I think there should be a podcast for people to talk about this movie because I was watching, and I'll be perfectly honest with you. I was watching this movie, the effect of gamma rays on Man in the Moon Marigolds.
Okay.
Watching this
Yeah.
movie, which by the way is an amazing movie, if no, you may have to seek it out because
Okay.
it's
I don't think
you
I've
know,
ever seen it.
and it's out of print. I don't know why it's out of, but it's an amazing movie with Joanne Woodward, who's
Okay.
more well known as Paul Newman's wife, but basically a mother who is, she's got issues, for lack
Okay.
of a better word, and the story is about her her and her daughters, and just what they, a day in the life, so to speak. And I
Okay.
remember watching this movie, which didn't have a commentary track. A lot of boutique DVDs, for lack of a better word, because a lot of people don't really do DVDs and Blu-rays anymore. So there is
Right.
somewhat of a specialized market for that now.
Yeah.
Man in the Moon Marigold being one such DVD, which didn't have a lot of bells and whistles on the DVD. I wish it would have. And I believe that the film is based on a play, which accounts
Okay.
for probably some of the dialogue and backstory of the movie. But I remember watching this DVD that I had on, and it just, I was watching it, and just the Joanne Woodward character in this film. And it's no coincidence that she seems to be in so many movies that are just amazing movies that nobody, like They Might Be Giants. There's a band, They Might Be Giants, people,
Yeah.
you know, that band name was named after a movie They Might Be Giants with Joanne Woodward and George C. Scott, where she it's kind of like a Sherlock Holmes sort of story and
Right.
whatnot. She was also in obviously the Three Faces of Eve, the precursor to movies like Sybil, and
Mm-hmm.
successor to movie like The Snake Pit. So Three Faces of Eve. She was in the Sound and the Fury, which is essentially an unfilmable book. Basically, I'm not sure if you've ever read it or attempted
No,
to
I
read it.
haven't, but yeah.
You're not missing a lot.
Okay.
She was one of the good things about the film, but just example after example of movies that are basically I don't want to say out of circulation because they're not, but yeah, they're not going to be streaming on Netflix. I wish they
Yeah.
would be, but they're not. But that's kind of what piqued my interest. And
Okay.
also, this was going on at the same time that year, last calendar year, have to just kind of like stop and
Right.
but there, I believe last year there was on either Netflix or Hulu, there was an update of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest,
Mm-hmm.
which the Nurse Ratched series, which for me, there are many people who like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, be it the book or the film. I am of the opinion that One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and all variations of it is probably the greatest source of a lot of negative stigma and stereotype about mental illness,
Okay.
because you hear that and it's a good movie. I'm not going to deny it's a good movie. I mean, it's one of the few movies to win all top
Yeah.
four.
Exactly.
I believe Silence of the Lambs and Capra's movie It Happened One Night being the others.
Yeah.
But as far as it relates to mental health and mental illness issues, if people hear mental illness and they immediately go to Jack Nicholson in the film and Nurse Ratched, I don't know if that's testament to how well the movie is or if there's such an immediate go-to, but I think that
Yeah.
that movie in many ways is basically the birth of a nation of mental health movies, because
Interesting.
it's nobody if the book had just been left as a book and they hadn't made a movie, and again, I'm sure that's blasphemy to a lot of a lot of people who like the movie, but I probably wouldn't have a problem with it. But the fact that the movie was made, and like I said, a good movie. I'm not knocking the movie, but I am knocking how it's become like shorthand for mental illness in our
Yeah.
culture. Nobody talks about The Snake Pit with Olivia de Havilland. Amazing, amazing movie. Nobody
Right.
talks about Three Faces of Eve with Joanne Woodward.
Right.
Nobody talks about Sybil with
Right.
Sally Field. Nobody, just example after example, nobody talks about those. They all want to talk about What Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just so annoying for so many different reasons.
Yeah.
Primary reason being that if it becomes a stereotype and it becomes like the most immediate shorthand for a lot of, whether it's schizophrenia, whether it's bipolar, whether it's whatever diagnosis or whatever
Mm-hmm.
condition, that's not a good thing by any stretch of the imagination, because you're always equating that person and that condition or disorder with Jack Nicholson and with Nurse Ratched.
Right.
You're always equating it with whatever you saw in a movie.
Well, and I do think there is a stereotype that, and it's a very convenient trope,
Mhm.
is that if you're in some kind of mental hospital, the aides are all dressed in white, and they're cruel and they're uncaring and they're, because that's a good trope for a spy movie, right? Or
Yeah.
a suspense movie. And I know that has to be frustrating for people that do work at care facilities that care 100% and have good hearts and are doing something, especially during this pandemic where
Mhm.
they were putting themselves at risk, a great risk during COVID.
Mhm.
So yeah, and I do think that you can separate you can separate art from reality, and that's what
Exactly.
sometimes you tend to think like this is um the like police movies, right? Like the majority of officers never take their gun. They
Mhm.
never fire their gun. Actual in the field is a number I've heard before.
Mhm.
But if you watch TV, or movies, it's a totally different thing. So I think that's a really good point to the reality of entertainment and the comparison of reality and entertainment, and not to let one overshadow the other. That's an interesting.
Exactly. Yeah, like I said, I mean, I'm not knocking One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest,
Yeah,
and I'm not
sure.
saying it's a bad movie. What I am saying is that when it becomes just the immediate shorthand
Yeah.
for something going on, that's what I have. That's what I think is problematic, and that is, I mean, as we're recording this, in fact, in the and this will probably be past tense by I know
Yeah.
podcast. Is that okay to say on mic? Because I think
Yeah.
people listening might know this, but
Yeah.
those who, that's probably the dirty little secret of podcasting is when we're recording, it might be a month or two or three
Well,
later.
yeah. In fact, I've shared that with mine, Brian. You
Yeah.
you had not heard. I recently went through some health issues,
Mhm.
and so um, the last live, the last Set Lusting Bruce podcast I had recorded was like April 9th,
Yeah.
and then but I had like 8 podcasts in the can. So I
Yeah.
was able to just keep new podcasts so much because my fear, and I've shared this with my
Mhm.
audience, is that you worry you're not going to get a guest, and so
Mhm.
you won't be able to do a new
Ex-
episode every week, right? So
exactly.
you put them in the can as much as you can. Now then, I have pretty much wiped out my buffer,
Yeah.
but to be fair, I'm talking to you at 9 this morning, and I've
Mhm.
got one at 10 this morning,
Yeah.
to try to book up a little bit
Mhm.
again, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah,
So I'll mention this in past tense.
yeah,
But so in I'm speaking in future tense, but
yeah.
referring to in past tense.
Very
But as
timey
we're
wimey.
correctly, so as we're recording this, so I'll refer to this in the past tense. In the New York City mayor's race,
Yeah.
for example, one of the candidates stepped in it
Hmm.
big time, and I'm not gonna leave the names
Okay.
off so as to not offend
Yeah.
any listeners who may be in the city of New York who might
Yeah.
be participating in the election. But this one candidate, he just really stepped in it, and as it relates to mental illness issues. And
Yeah.
there's another scenario, and oddly enough, it seems to be coast to coast in California in the city of Los Angeles, there has been an ongoing and continuing discussions as far as homelessness
Hmm.
and you know um, and factoring in mental illness as it relates to homelessness. And
Yeah.
so I just think so, and so I mentioned those two scenarios because they are both um, scenarios in which there has been a lot of discourse founded in stereotypes and stigma, and in both instances, just a lot of dumb stuff that's been, bandied about.
Absolutely. So let's go back to the beginning. So talk about where did you grow up? And was there a lot of music played in your house? Was your family musical?
Short answer would be no.
Okay.
They were not. they
Okay.
they were not. Now I did grow up in a stereotypical
Okay.
Italian Catholic background where there'd
Okay.
be a picture of Sinatra, the Pope, and the Last Supper in that order.
Right.
That kind of household. So I did hear Frank Sinatra growing up. I did hear. I'm not a big Dean Martin fan. I know that's probably going to add to a lot of listeners.
No, no.
I'm not. I'm not a big Dean Martin fan. So on the whole Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin thing, I'm definitely a big Jerry Lewis fan. So, but I'm not a Dean Martin fan. Um, but lot of Sinatra. I did hear a lot of Sinatra growing up.
Okay.
Um, but other than that, and my dad was really open about just simply not liking music, period. Which
Okay.
is so I don't know how how I developed it. If
Yeah.
I certainly didn't inherit it from him.
Hmm.
My mom was slightly more interested in music because she was an exchange student when she was in school and had gone to Spain. And so I remember when I would hear there was a Madonna song, uh,
Hmm.
80s era Madonna, not
Yeah.
current era Madonna, but 80s era Madonna, La Isla Bonita.
Hmm.
My mom would love that song, and then I'd tell her, "Oh, by the way, that's Madonna," and my mom would go, "Oh, wait, I don't like it now because it was
so,
Madonna." But
so
yeah.
without that strong musical influence, where when you got junior high, high school, what kind of music did you listen to? Was it a lot
Oh,
of this based on your friendships and
yeah, punk and indie rock.
Okay.
I loved when I was little. One of my I forgot who it was, like one of my mom's friends or one of my dad's friends had a ham radio,
Okay.
and I had an interest for a while in ham radio and eventually shortwave radio. Shortwave radio, for those who don't know, and it's I don't want to say obsolete, but it's a lot of its magic, for lack of a better word, has
Yeah.
gone, no comparison to the internet. So this is obviously
Right.
pre-internet. Shortwave radio, which is basically similar to FM radio, and this is terrestrial radio I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So on your radio dial, you've got FM frequency modulation, so it's going to be like the 91, all the 91s and above are going to be the
Yeah.
FM stations. The AM, so shortwave radio is a method of transmitting radio waves, and it's
Okay.
typically done like for natural disasters when there's an emergency. It's
Yeah.
done for like inter you know I was going to say interdimensional, but that would probably not be
Yeah.
correct. But international broadcasting. And I remember
Right.
when I was little, I would listen to John Peel in the BBC. John Peel was and I did not realize he had passed on only fairly recently in the
Okay.
last 10, 15, maybe 20 years. I don't know if
Okay.
it's been that long, but this guy he's basically the equivalent of like a Dick Clark in the US or a
Okay.
Wolfman Jack, or there's a DJ who's amazing in California, Rodney on the rock KROQ.
Okay.
Initially on KR, I don't think he's on KRQ anymore.
Okay.
But the John Peel would play anything and everything. He would play Motorhead, then he would
Yeah.
play Led Zeppelin, then he would play world beat music, then he would play. I mean, just everything imaginable he would play.
Hmm.
And I remember the very first time I heard John Peel and this was on shortwave radio.
Yeah.
I distinctly remember the first songs I heard. He played X, not the LA punk band X, but he would
Okay.
play X from Australia.
Okay.
He played a punk band called the Colorblind James Experience.
All right.
He played Helen Keller Plaid, which is obviously a distasteful band name, but apparently
Hmm.
there was a band name back then. He would play not Steel Pulse, I think it was, reggae band.
Okay.
So he just all over the place,
Eh,
and
What
he was
time
somewhat
period
of
is
a
this, Brian?
80s, like probably late
Okay.
80s.
So very different than AM or FM radio that you're hearing
Mhm.
in the car going back and forth to school or something, right? I mean, this is
Exactly.
totally different.
Exactly. And there is a figure of speech, and this would obviously be more pertinent to those in the US because our radios, are
Yeah.
governed by the FCC and are, and whatnot. But there's a figure of speech left of the dial,
Yes.
which means all the radio stations left of dial, meaning like the 88s and 981s, those are
Yeah.
typically going to be the public broadcasting
Right.
stations, which I think that's still, I think it is still governed by the FCC that that's the case. But so anything left most of the dial, this is
Yeah.
like a visual description of the dial, is going to be like the classical stations, going to be the NPR stations, and those are typically the stations that are going to be what was conventionally called college radio or non-commercial radio,
Right.
who played all the good music. You know, back in the day, the REMs or the Camper Van Beethovens or the B-52, stuff like that, which is obviously somewhat of an obsolete term, but it's still kind of
Yeah.
shorthand for like the cool stations. I grew up in, Phoenix area. There was no college radio station that you could listen to at home.
Right.
And so there would be, and that's kind of weird saying it now in 2021, that you'd be at the mercy of a college radio station to hear good music.
But
And so,
that's true. I
yeah,
mean, that was the especially I don't want to be a cliche, right? But like I know, like my high school was in the 70s. I graduated high school in
yeah,
77. So the AM station back then, a little more diverse
mhm,
because, you would get pop crossover, you would
mhm,
get R&B, you would get, country, you would get a wide range on AM radio. But as the 80s started and you get more and more corporate, and this is not necessarily a bad thing, it's just the nature of the business.
mhm,
Corporate radio began more and more going into segments, which is what
exactly.
we totally are now. I mean, like if you own Sirius XM, there is a channel for every love. If you are a Grateful Dead person, there is
Yeah,
a station that plays nothing but Grateful Dead. I have E Street Radio, which is Springsteen.
mhm, yeah,
Now they have a few. They have, like the 70s and 80s and 90s, but there is Yacht Rock, there is Road Trip
yeah,
Radio, there is
yeah,
these themes that and if you don't want diversity, if you are into 70s jam, or if you're into heavy metal,
yeah,
there is a channel that's going to play
yeah,
just that for you
yeah,
nowadays.
yeah, yeah. So true.
Yeah.
And I still love having, the Carpenters. Huge
Mm.
Carpenters fan. That's not like the yak that I brought with me today, but
Yeah.
stuff like that. And I just like the freedom of, listening to, the Carpenters, and then, something else, and then something else, because that's the way in real life. Most people, like that, they have their preferences of what they'll,
Yeah.
listen to or not. But
Right.
in real life, reality is you're going to listen to whatever the heck you want to listen to.
Yes.
And so I think the whole notion of like particular format is somewhat, I don't want to say outdated, but it sort of is.
Yeah. I think you can, um, it, and I'm going to sound like old man, good old days syndrome, right? But there was something beautiful about this wide diversity, and you wouldn't
Yeah,
sure what you get.
yeah,
And it sounds like the shortwave radio hitting into BBC, as a youngster, a young teenager,
mhm,
you just got to your palette was covered with all kinds of different musical genres.
yeah. And one thing that, I'm still struck by is there are, and occasionally when I come across someone who is from England, I, inevitably ask, "Oh, have you heard of John Peel?"
Yeah,
And I am actually surprised that there are a lot of people, who are from England who don't know who he is.
yeah,
Because I had naturally, and as naive as it sounds, I naturally thought that he would have been as, ubiquitous. Is that the right way to say that? Ubiquitous. It's one of the first you see like in
yeah,
writing, and then you try to say it, and if it
yeah.
sounds right. As like a Ryan Seacrest or a Casey Kasem or a,
Or yeah, yeah,
Wolfman Jack.
yeah.
But that's not the case
Oh,
necessarily.
how
There are people
interesting.
in England who don't know who he is.
That's interesting. So good. So, what it sounds like you have a diverse palette to this day, but is there a specific genre of music you tend to go to on a regular basis, or is there, and I've had other guests that do this that have had, well, when I'm in a mood to celebrate, I go to
Mhm,
this kind of music. When I'm in the mood to be cheered up, I go to this kind of
mhm.
music. Talk to me a little bit about current day music.
Current day, I do like, I mean, I literally really do like all sorts of music.
Yes.
And I say that with any, with no, qualifiers or
Yeah.
exceptions of like, except for country, because I do like a lot of country.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people would be surprised at how much, um, people think who's that guy, Morgan Waller, whoever, they think he's the face of country music. No, that
Yeah.
is that is 100% false.
Yeah.
The face of country music in 2021 and 2022 is people like Breland. I think Breland is amazing.
Yeah.
You get bands like Chapel Hart,
Yeah.
the Three Black Women. I think they're from Louisiana, Mississippi. Amazing, amazing music, and they've got the guy from ZZ Top who actually is on a couple of tracks. Um, so there's so much country music of color that
Hmm.
no one really thinks about. So I think a lot of country music today is just amazing. I do like a lot of contemporary country. I if it, and actually, let me do a quick qualifier
Sure,
of a
please.
non-qualifier. I do not like, and this would probably be my only except for, is I don't like a lot of bro country.
Yes.
That's maybe where I draw the line. I, I
Hmm.
I don't like a, you know what I mean? And that's a very specific like subgenre, the ones
Yes.
where it's all talking about, um I'm not sure what, but
Well, the cliche, right, is we're going to talk
yeah,
about my truck. We're going to talk about getting
yeah,
drunk. We're going to talk about,
yeah.
and yeah,
Some of the bro country I draw the line out, but for the most part, there is so much country music that is just amazing. I mean, even the guy from Hootie and the Blowfish,
yeah,
who's been doing country for, I don't know how long now
yeah,
at this point. And when people think it's just a bunch of old white guys in their pickups, talking beer, some of that's there still,
yeah,
obviously, unfortunately, but it is much, much more diverse. It's probably the most diverse genre at this point in 2021, I would say, probably more than any other. Um, at least that's my opinion.
yeah.
I could be mistaken in that, but people probably might want to disagree
No,
with me
no,
or
no.
without.
That's
But I think that is by far the most. And again, we're recording this on Juneteenth.
yes,
Um, I got no doubt in my mind whatsoever that many of the Juneteenth celebrations going on in our country will, a majority will be country music
yes,
of artists of color.
yeah,
That's how much that it's changed
hmm,
since the all white guys era of
yeah.
country.
I think so. I think there is a lot of that, and I think it's interesting, and um, I loved the Ken Burns documentary on the history of country music. I thought it
Yeah.
was fascinating.
Mhm.
But I do agree with you. There is a diversity there, and there's a diversity across a lot of genres
Mhm.
that nowadays music that while the audience may be very segmented, it seems like the artists themselves tend to go back and forth and be able to mix and match where you have, people, um, and one of the things that, as it always does, it goes back to Bruce Springsteen. One of the things he's been doing for the past year is doing a radio show on
Mhm.
Sirius XM every couple weeks. He'll do My Home to Yours, and he'll do roughly an hour, and he'll do a theme. And this last show was about old bones, and the theme was all songs about going old.
But yeah,
And
yeah.
like, and he did everyone from, he played a huge diversity of artists playing that. And so he's had, songs about, the automobile, and he's done hip hop, and he's had,
Mhm.
country music, and he's had folk, and he's had rock. And it's been interesting the amount of diversity he as an artist. And he was being interviewed about it, and he said that's one of the reasons I love doing the show is I figure out a theme, and then I get to explore
Mhm.
music that'll hit that theme and to hear different music, which is kind of fun.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Well, good. Well, so talk about some of your, you mentioned growing up loving punk and you know, uh, a lot of rock and roll, but talk to me maybe shows from stories from concert goings, and talk to me about some of your best live experiences, Brian.
Well, I was not allowed to go to a lot of shows when I lived at home
Okay.
because obviously, rock music being, of the
The
devil
devil's
and
music.
whatnot.
Yes.
And
Yes.
no, and I kid. I mean, they weren't that bad, but
Yeah.
it was, but still, it was
Yes.
discouraged. I would say, well, I did enjoy that there were a few music festivals that I was able to get to, just
Okay.
local ones, um, at a water park where it was Camper Van Beethoven, and it was Camper Van Beethoven after they had just been signed to a major label, so it's
Oh,
that
nice.
time period. Red Hot Chili Peppers, Mary's Danish, they were
Okay.
I want to say 80s or 90s band. I don't know if they're
Okay.
still. I don't think they're still. I don't think they're still around. But so it was like Camper Van Beethoven, Mary's Danish,
Yeah.
Red Hot Chili Peppers, a bunch of local bands. I really have always liked the local shows that,
Okay.
which is kind of ironic because at the time I was under 18,
Right.
and obviously you can't go to a bar when you're under 18.
Right.
Which I never had. So it was at the mercy of all ages shows or
Hmm.
18 plus or 17 plus or
Right.
16 plus, and having to get a wristband and having to get a stamp on your hand, which wouldn't wash off for like a week
Yes.
afterwards. So you had like a stamp on your hand that wouldn't
Right.
wash off. So a lot of like music festivals and like local shows, and to this day, I guess I don't, and obviously it's more socially acceptable to say this now as opposed to, but I just don't see the point of paying, what's an average big ticket show now, like 50, $60,
Yeah.
minimum,
If
I
not
believe.
over 100.
Yeah,
Yeah.
to pay to see the band that from your vantage point is the equivalent to like, a hangnail,
Yeah.
and then having to if you drove, having to navigate out the parking lot
Right.
2 hours or more, which is not uncommon, by the way, which is
Right.
not uncommon if
Right.
depending on where you see the show at,
Yeah.
and having to deal with the traffic and whatnot, and then compounding it. Sometimes there's maybe, so that just doesn't make sense. I mean, you know what I
Right.
mean? Whereas if you go to a local show at a bar where you see, maybe 5 or 6 bands with a $10 cover,
Yeah.
some will be good, some will be cover bands, some won't be, some will be, that makes more sense to me because then you can hang out with the band afterwards. You can say, hey man, nice set. And you can't do that, and that's just the nature of, music being what it is. I mean, you can't go to,
Uh,
a Springsteen concert and after the show go up to him, unless you maybe win a ticket,
exactly. Yeah.
and then, except for that, you can't really go up to him afterwards and say, hey Bruce, I enjoyed this. You can't really do that, really.
So
Whereas if it's a local show, you kind
yeah,
of get that I've always liked that interaction between the artist and the audience. That's one that has always resonated with me.
there was a time right when right before we had Chris, and then right maybe after we had Chris. So we're
Mhm.
talking 87 to like 92, 93, where Linda and I were very active in the Dallas local band fandom.
Mhm.
There's a band that still exists today, Brave Combo, that
A
did
Brave
rock and
Combo's awesome.
yes,
They are still around?
yes they are,
Oh,
and
they are
they
legendary.
yes, and so we would go see Brave Condo anytime they'd play. A lady named Sarah Hickman, who we have remained friends with. The new Edie Brickell and the New Bohemians were big then. Other bands, and you would go, and I would make the joke that if you and don't get me wrong, I loved going to see Billy Joel when he was touring, and getting that full experience and hearing the hits. Uh, you know, um, and other big bands, you would go and see, but you didn't get to you didn't get to go up to Billy Joel after the show and say, "Hey, great show, Billy," and he's like, "Oh, okay, are you on my mailing list?" you know,
Yeah, yeah.
like, good, I appreciate it, and where they go and back and go, "Oh, it's Jesse, it's good to see you again," because they would remember you. So there is that beauty, and I think absolutely I miss going to Springsteen. And if you have never seen a Springsteen show, I do recommend, Brian, that you take the money and go through the traffic and all
Definitely.
the joys to see that
Well,
experience.
yeah, and that's one example where it would be worth it. I
Right.
mean, no question about it.
Yeah.
That's definitely good because he's and and it's funny you mention that because he is someone who, and again, just as we're recording, he's got something with the Killers, I believe.
Yes.
That's
They
so
just put
he's
out a new
someone
song.
who,
Yeah.
yeah, who has been, like I said, does have that track record
Yeah.
of being supportive of other artists
Yeah.
and be so yeah, so you're absolutely right, he
Yeah.
does have that tradition
But there
of
is, so let's just throw that aside. Um, there is something about going to a small little pub,
Mhm,
Poor David's Pub, or wherever, the local band, and hear someone where you pay maybe $20 to
mhm,
hear this touring band, or as you say, you go to a club and it's just a local cover band,
mhm,
and maybe they do a couple of new songs or maybe they don't. And it's just, I think the pandemic, we've all missed that. We've
mhm,
missed going to hear live music
yeah,
and just enjoying that energy and magic of someone performing for us.
mhm. Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So um, let's go back to the podcast a little bit. What are future plans? What have you got coming up, and what are you planning to continue to do with the podcast?
That's a good question. One of the things that, and I know I sound like a complete idiot when I say this, but one of the things that I've been interested in, probably more and more since starting the podcast, is there is a whole other area of mental health and mental illness advocacy, which I had not really been aware of, and that is family members of and caregivers of
Yeah,
loved ones with schizophrenia or with whatever it can be,
yeah,
who are dealing with getting treatment for their loved ones, working with the doctors, working with the courts to get court ordered treatment for
hmm,
them. I know that there has been in mental health circles a lot of debate about, oh well, are they consenting to it or whatnot, and this is a situation where you're dealing with someone's life.
yeah,
Are they going to be dead or are they going to be so
yeah,
in that situation? And again, we're talking about a very specific population, a very specific demographic. Um, I'm not in a position to tell a family member, oh, sorry, you can't get treatment for your loved one.
hmm,
So situations like that where there has been ongoing discussions about um, how we treat the most serious mentally ill in our society,
yeah,
and so that aspect of it is something that I found more and more fascinating because no
hmm,
one really thinks about that. I mean, there's
yeah,
often the first party advocacy where if where you yourself know that something's not right and you're seeking out help and whatnot, that's one thing. But I think if we're telling people that you're not alone and there are people who care, which is all true, because of those
yeah,
listening who are feeling down, you're not alone. But I think if we're telling people that there should be some proof or evidence of that, so that if people say, "Oh, really? You really care about me and whatnot,"
Yeah.
that we be able to show that there are people out there who are busting their tails off to get treatment for you. There are people busting their tails off to get more funding for services, to get more funding for whether it's the more severely mentally ill, or whether it's so just that wide range of perspective is something that I really hadn't thought about when I first started the podcast.
Okay.
It's something that I'm much more sensitive to now than I was before. Um, but yeah, so I would say that. I mean, there's
Okay.
the one drawback to that is that many of the parents of and family and mothers of side of it have been extremely hostile to me.
Hmm.
I don't know why. I don't know why they take offense at that. I mean,
Yeah.
many of them, like that, and I know they've been through a hard time and whatnot. But if someone's reaching out to help, if someone's reaching out to learn more about what their family's been through, my first reaction if someone's helping, reaching out to me to find out, is not to like attack the person and be rude and hostile.
Hmm.
It's to go, oh, okay, so there's someone reaching out to help. So I guess that would be the answer to your question. And then also, I'm also fascinated by a lot of area of mental health that's, almost like a outside the diagnostic model. In,
Yeah.
in other words, where there's, oh, someone's bipolar, or someone's, got a diagnostic label. I think that, um, I think those dialogues also are extremely, just fascinating, because I've from a background where the labels were always seen as like the norm, and
Yeah.
that's the way it's supposed to be. And I'm really, really growing partial to letting people decide for themselves how they get to respond to something. You know what I mean?
I do.
Like,
I do.
rather than giving someone, one size fits all,
Yeah.
recognizing that there are going to be differences, because not everybody's the same. What works for you isn't
Right.
necessarily work for me, isn't going to necessarily work for someone listening.
Yeah.
And so I really, and the thing that, to answer your question, I see a lot of voices and perspectives that are often discounted and marginalized. And I think, and again, if we're telling people you're not alone, but yet there's something that could help them feel less alone, I think it's worth it to allow those voices to the table. Because, for example, if there's people who hate taking meds, and they've worked, and I want to emphasize, with your doctors, keeping
Yeah.
your doctor in the loop. If there's people who hate meds and they feel like they're all by themselves, no one else hates their meds too, that's a problematic scenario. And I think, and conversely, those who are figuring out a game plan with their meds, same with that. They often will feel alone, much
Yeah.
as those who are struggling with their meds will often feel alone. And I think in both instances, there's an obligation. If we tell people you're not alone, then show that perspective so they have proof of that. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I know like one of the things that you do in every one of your podcasts at least twice is you give resources and
Mhm,
where people can go. And I will when we wrap things up, I'll give you that. I'll give you a little heads up to go ahead and have that blurb ready
mhm.
that you
Oh,
can share. So that because I want to do that. Um, so are there? Um, what have I not asked you that I should have asked you, Brian? Let's put it that way.
oh,
What's a good question I should
um,
ask you that I shouldn't have?
I don't know. I'm just happy to be here. I know that I was sort of going back and forth as far as I couldn't decide on which
Yeah,
artist or band to mention. So
yeah.
I wasn't sure if you were going to ask me that, or if,
Sure, go ahead. Just talk anything, any
yeah.
music, any bands you want to promote that have musicians that have brought you joy and comfort. Please bring them up.
Yeah, the one that has brought me particularly joy and happiness is, there's a band, a band, a Scottish band called Frightened Rabbit.
Frightened
And
Rabbit.
they
Okay.
have a reputation. I don't know. I don't agree with this reputation, I might add. I do not agree with this reputation at all. But they have a reputation of being a band like, like Radiohead, or a band like, you know, drawing a blank on any other example, as
Okay.
being depressing, or being like
Okay.
very melancholy. And I've never found Frightened Rabbit to be melancholy or depressing at all. I found them to be very uplifting and very joyous and very celebratory.
Okay.
The thing that is relates to mental health, particularly, is Scott Hutchinson from Frightened Rabbit was someone who is no longer with us, and did have a lot of personal demons that he dealt with. But
Hmm.
I remember when I heard actually a couple of Winter of Mixed Drinks, one of their best albums, and also just example after example, Midnight Organ Fright. I remember hearing these songs, whether it's the Modern Leper, or Swim Until You Can't See Land. A lot of the lyrics just had a very hopeful tone to it.
Okay.
So they're old fashioned, In Living Color. There's so many songs where the lyrics and the music both sort of had that sort of cynical view, but it also had a very hopeful outlook, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I'm looking. I just did a quick search and I found their website.
Yeah.
What is there one album you recommend us to start out with, or is there
Yeah,
a
I would
couple of
say a
songs that?
lot of people would say Midnight Organ Fight. That I don't think is their best album. I think their best album is Winter of Mixed Drinks. There
Okay.
is not a bad track on that album at all.
Okay.
Um, Sing, Swim Until You Can't See Land, The Loneliness and the Scream, The Wrestle, Skip the Youth, Nothing Like You. Man,
Okay.
no, not a bad track on the album. Um,
What about them spoke to you when you heard
uh,
of them? Why did it speak to you?
Well, because I hadn't heard anything like that.
Okay.
They're clearly in the indie rock category. They were
Yeah.
inevitably signed to a major label, but they still are in that indie rock category. But the fact that it had a distinct point of view, I think. Well, to answer your question, a couple of the songs have some f bombs in there,
Okay.
just in the unlikeliest of places, like just a verse or two, and they just nonchalantly slip in an f-bomb or something like that. So that's right off the bat some of the language issues in the lyrics. I notice sometimes, if like I said, I don't know what the reason was for that, why they didn't, and they were on a major record label by that point, so there's nothing really to gain by dropping in an f-bomb or two in some of the and this is, and I just want to clarify, this is maybe like, I'm going to say 4 or 5, not a whole lot of songs that are language minded, but yeah. But to answer your question, no, just the fact that it was, and the song titles, even the song titles were like The Modern Leper, or Heads Will Roll, or which didn't really match, the sound of the song didn't really match what the
Hmm.
song title was. You hear a song called Heads Will Roll, you think it's going to be like a raging heavy metal song. Heads Will Roll was obviously not a heavy metal song.
Yeah.
um but yeah, I just found, and still do find their music to just very distinctive.
Mhm.
And it definitely is something that it had a distinct reaction to. It's a band that those who hear them have a definitive reaction, yay or nay. And I like music like that, where you hear, the first few bars going in, I'm going to like this song, or no, I'm not going to like this song.
Yeah.
They are definitely a band that has, forces you to decide, do I like this or not? And
Hmm.
it's just, they I'm on their I got stung by them. I guess that would be the
That's
way of putting it.
cool. That's very cool. Do have do they had they toured? Had you been able to see them live?
I was not able to see them live. There was a volcano, um we talked about, but there was a volcano eruption, I think, in Europe at the time, and a lot of flights out of Europe were grounded. It was going on at that time, so they had scheduled a show during that
Hmm.
time. I believe they had been here in the States for either South by Southwest
Okay.
or CMJ. CMJ, I think, they had not gone under by that time, so CMJ was still around when they were
Hmm.
around. But I believe they had done some U.S. appearances.
Okay.
I was not able to see them at the time. I wish I had. But they, like I said, they are just, and there's so many good bands out of Scotland too.
Yeah.
Also, I might add, Jesus and Mary Chain, Simple Minds are from Scotland.
Yeah.
Just example after example. So that also is they arrived on U.S. shore just from a tradition of like so much good music from Scotland.
Hmm.
And so that right there, they've already got somewhat of a pedigree coming in. And I'm sure there's some bands out of Scotland that Glass Vegas, another one. Glass
Yeah.
Vegas, a band out of Scotland that I love. I'm sure there's got to be some bands from Scotland that suck. I can't th-
But you haven't found one
I
yet.
can't think of
Oh,
any. I
that's
really
interesting.
can't
That's
think of
great.
any. There's a lot of
Yeah.
bands from England that suck, obviously, but I cannot think of a band that I've heard of out of Scotland that does not suck. They've all been really, really amazing,
Uh,
amazing talent.
I
I
will
don't know
have
what
to
they've got in
ask.
the water in Scotland, but there
That's
is so
interesting.
much.
You know,
I mean,
my
yeah.
my my friend Terry Smith does a podcast, a music talks, where you pick a song from every decade you've been alive, and he is from Scotland, and so I will have to ask him about Frightened Rabbit, and I'll also share him your theory that, as far as he knows, and he might be able to say, well, here's a couple of bands that didn't quite make the cut of him
But I'm
being
serious.
from Scotland.
I can't think of any other region I can't think of any other region in the world
Yeah, that's
where, like,
interesting.
consistently
Yeah.
everything I hear just blows me away. I can't think of any other region in the world. It's Scotland
That's
of all
perfect. I love that.
places.
That is such a great way. All
And
right.
Frightened Rabbit being part of it. Yeah, I didn't mean to.
Yeah. No, no, that's awesome. All right. We are wrapping up. We are getting close to an hour. But I did want to ask you the Mary question. And so here's the premise for those of you who this may be the first time you're listening to the podcast because you're a friend and a fan of Brian. In Bruce Springsteen's song Thunder Road, Jay Armstrong is an honors English teacher in the Philadelphia area. He just recently retired, but he would every year have his honors English class, his seniors, take the poem Thunder Road, which is, and go through all the lyrics, discuss the imagery that Bruce uses, discuss the themes of the poem. They would compare it to other poems, including Robert Frost, The Road Not Taken. And after a 2-day discussion, would come back and ask the question, does Mary get in the car at the end of Thunder Road? So, Brian, that is your question. Does Mary
Well,
get in the car?
I would say no.
Okay.
And for a couple of reasons. There does need to be somewhat of a mystique. I guess would that be the right word?
Right.
Um, and again, speaking in contemporary context, that probably wouldn't be a smart thing to do these days. But
Okay.
that's a universally and time honored answer too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because
Sure.
once she gets in the car, then it there's so many different roads that no pun intended roads.
No, no, but it's
But,
true. And,
um,
what happens after, and they lived happily ever after,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And the question is, and by the way, it's about 60-40. About 60% say yes, she gets in the car. About 40% say no, no, she doesn't. That she's either too afraid to make that choice. She decides that She's not going to settle. He hasn't made enough case for it. She wants someone who thinks she's more than just, hey, you ain't a beauty, but you're all right. I mean, there's a whole lot of reasons. So yeah, I think that's a very good answer, Brian.
Yeah, and I think it would be more consistent with, and it's weird talking about like Ruth not being consistent with her like real life, but I
Yeah.
think that would be consistent with real life, is that there
Hmm.
would be that sense of fear and that sense of should I or should I not?
Yeah.
And I think if she did get in the car, then that would almost like invalidate a lot of the lyric. You know what I mean?
Okay. Sounds great.
So yeah.
Brian, this was so much fun. I appreciate it. You were kind enough when I was, as I was going through my recovering from surgery, I put the word out. I said, "Hey, I'm going to need guests," and you jumped on and signed on and said, "Hey, I'd love to talk to you again." So I appreciate that, Brian.
Oh, thank you.
Um, Tell people how they can find you and your podcast.
Podcast is mental health film comment, and it's everywhere you can find podcast. I know that there is a podpage.com, and then it'll be slash mental health film comment.
Okay.
Um, and I always want to emphasize, the wellness and the
Yeah.
health. So, honestly, I don't care if anyone listens to the podcast or not. I do care about people feeling better and feeling happier. So I did want to just briefly mention the crisis text line,
Please do.
which is, and I should have that. Oh yeah, in the U.S. 741-741. That's in the U.S. 741-741. In the U.K. 85258. And the suicide prevention hotline in the U.S. is 1-800-273-TALK. And I know NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness, and also madinamerica.com would set you in the right direction as far as finding resources.
I think that is wonderful, and I appreciate it. I remember when I was on your podcast, you made a point of adding that, and that's why I wanted to give you the chance here on this podcast. I think you are doing great work.
Oh,
I
thank you.
think you are trying to bring awareness that the diversity of people that are struggling mentally, and that there are, as you said, there is not one size fits all, and that working together with your health professionals to find the right path for your well-being is vital. And I think more importantly, don't be afraid to ask for help. There
Exactly.
is all of us have have been challenged, and all of us at times can feel um, like things are really um, you know I'm gonna flat say hopeless, and the reality is it isn't. And
Exactly.
so I've been going back and forth a lot lately with a song that is not very well known by Bruce, but and so I'm going to end with this lyrics. "This Is Your Sword" is a song that was on his High Hopes album. And the song ends with, "In the days of despair, you can grow hard till you close your mind and empty your heart. If you find yourself staring into the abyss, hold tight to your loved ones and remember this. This shield will protect your sacred heart. This sword will defend from what comes in the dark. Should you grow weary on the battlefield, do not despair. Our love is real. This is your sword. This is your shield. This is the power of love revealed. And and give all the love that you have in your soul, and give all the love that you have in your soul." I wish you, my friend, all the love that I have in my heart for you, continued success, and thank you so much for all the work you're doing, and making it where it's entertaining and it's
Yeah.
not just a drum story. So good job, my friend.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me on.
All right.
Yeah.
And listeners, you stay strong. Remember, go get your shot, get vaccinated. Till then, remember to wear your mask, wash your hands, remember social distance, because the only way we're going to get back to normal is by helping each other and being there for each other. For now, take care, and we'll talk to you soon. Goodbye. Thank you to my Patreons: Andrew Goddard, Betsy Hodges, Levi Petri, Elizabeth Bronson, Stephen Malio, Holly Mack, Steve Rogers, Dale Hosick, Terry Smith, Anna Lynn, Chris Bloom, and Mary Thomas. You all are my monthly angels. Thank you so much for the love and support you give on this podcast. You are greatly appreciated.
You just heard the fun talking, hard rocking, music loving, album ranking, fan thanking, joy spreading, lyric reading, story sharing podcast that is the one, the only Set Listing Bruce. Set Listing Bruce is part of the Southgate Media podcast group. The theme for Set Listing Bruce was written by David Rosen, used by permission.